1856, the Carolina Low Country, a land of swamps and tidewater plantations, where the air clings heavy with heat and the smell of rice fields rotting in their own wetness. Cypress trees rise from black waters, their roots knotted like clenched fists. Mosquitoes cloud the dusk. The river is everything here, road, border, and grave. Its current carries cotton, rice, and indigo out toward the sea. But it also carries whispers, whispers of what it swallows and never returns. By day, the ferryman works. His name is David. Broad-shouldered, skin darkened not only by the sun but by years of labor. His hands are thick and calloused around the worn wood of the oars. He rows for the masters, carrying planters in pressed coats, merchants with their ledgers, and overseers who carry whips even when they ride in boats. They speak of markets and harvests, their voices thin against the rush of water. David does not answer. He rows in silence, the blades of his oars slipping into the water like knives into flesh. Born into bondage, David never knew a day without chains. His mother, they say, was broken on the auction block before he could remember her face. His father, a whisper of a man who vanished downriver long ago. For David, the river has always been father, mother, and confessor. The overseers believe he is docile, that the rhythm of oars has tamed him. They do not understand. Rowing is not submission. It is strength, and strength one day will break them. The ferries are small, shallow boats, skimming across waterways thick with reeds and mud. The passengers see only the surface, the gleam of sun on water, the reflection of clouds in the stillness. David feels more. Beneath the calm, the river moves with slow violence, deep currents pulling toward unseen places. He knows its moods better than he knows his own heartbeat. He can tell when storms are coming by the taste of the air, when the tide shifts by the way the cypress roots tremble. The river to him is alive. It speaks in currents, in bubbles rising from unseen depths. Sometimes, when no masters watch, David dips his hand in and whispers back. Night in the low country is its own kind of prison. The fields go quiet, the overseers retreat to their cabins, and the enslaved are left in shacks that smell of sweat and damp wood. But the river never sleeps. It laps at the banks like a restless animal, waiting. In those hours, David's silence breaks, not with words, but with thought. He wonders how far the river runs, how far a boat could carry him if he rowed without stopping. Does it lead only to the sea, or could it deliver him to freedom? Others wonder too. In whispers carried from mouth to mouth in the quarters, his name is spoken not as a man but as a possibility. The ferryman knows the river, they say. The ferryman can row in darkness where no patrol dares. They do not ask him directly. To ask is dangerous. Overseers listen for stray words, and stray words can mean the whip, or worse. But still the question lingers in the dark. Could David carry more than passengers across the water? Could he carry lives? The ferryman says nothing. He only listens. The masters trust him because he is useful. The irony is not lost on David. The very thing that enslaves him, his strength on the oars, gives him freedom none of them suspect. He alone moves between plantations, between town and dock, between slave and master. He alone knows the unguarded paths through swamps and streams. They see him only as muscle. They do not see the maps etched into his memory, every bend of the river, every shadowed cove where a boat could hide. Each ferry crossing deepens the weight in him. He rows men fat with wealth, their rings gleaming in the sunlight, their boots polished while children starve in the cabins behind them. He hears their laughter as they spit tobacco into the river. He sees the way they slap the faces of those who serve them. He rows in silence, but hatred grows in the rhythm of the oars. The river knows this hatred. It swells with it. Sometimes as he rows, he imagines letting the boat drift, oars still, until the current takes them all. A single tilt of his wrist and the boat could capsize. The water would close over their fine coats, their ledgers, their whips. The river would drink them whole. No one would question him. Storms happen, boats overturn, drunks stumble. Accidents on the river are common. But David waits. He listens. The time is not yet. At night he dreams of chains sinking, iron links tumbling into darkness, bubbles rising, then silence. In those dreams, the river is not merely water. It is a maw swallowing pain, erasing cruelty. He wakes with sweat on his brow and the steady sound of the tide outside. The river is patient, and so is he. 1856 was a year of unrest. In Charleston, whispers of rebellion carried on salty air. On plantations, overseers tightened their grip, fearing shadows more than flesh. The Fugitive Slave Act stretched its claws even deeper, hunting runaways across state lines. Freedom seemed impossible, yet rumors swirled of men and women who had slipped the chains and vanished northward. David heard these rumors. He carried them with him like contraband, stored deep in silence where no overseer could find them. But rumors are dangerous. They stir the air, they set hearts beating faster, and in the low country the air was already heavy, ready to ignite. The ferryman continued his crossings. Day after day, night after night, the river carried him forward, carrying masters by sunlight and whispers by moonlight. He spoke little, but he felt much. The overseers thought him broken. They did not know the river was teaching him. What begins as silence will end in screams, and on those waters, David waited for the moment when the oars in his hands would no longer carry masters to their wealth, but chains to their grave. The year wore on, and the low country swelled with storms. Carolina summers are heavy, their air thick with heat until the sky cracks and the rains fall in sheets. The river rises quickly, turning crossings into wagers of chance. Ferries tilt under swollen currents, cypress knees vanish beneath floodwater, and men clutch the gunwales as if wood alone could keep them alive. For David, the ferryman, storms were not curse, but gift. The river grew louder then, its voice urgent, impatient. And he listened. The first drowning came on such a night. A storm rolled in from the coast, pushing rain like fists against the water. The overseer was drunk, his breath sour with whiskey, his purse heavy with coins meant for the master's coffers. He mocked the ferryman as he boarded, swaying, his boots slipping on wet planks. David rowed without expression, the oars cutting through waves that slapped against the boat like hands. Thunder rolled above them, and lightning split the sky, revealing the overseer's face, red, bloated, glistening with sweat. Halfway across, the river surged. David held the oars steady, but the overseer lurched to his feet, shouting curses at the storm. The boat rocked violently. One wrong step, one slip on soaked wood, and the overseer toppled. His scream was short, strangled by the river's mouth. David's oars stilled. For a moment only the storm spoke. The man thrashed, arms flailing, gold coins scattering from his belt into the black water, and then silence. The river took him. When David reached the opposite shore, the boat was empty. He said little, only bowed his head against the rain. Those who waited cursed the storm, muttered about accidents, and hurried off. No one asked questions. On the river, death was easy to lose, but in the quarters, whispers rose. An overseer gone, swallowed by the very waters he had crossed 1,000 times. Was it chance or something more? Around fire pits and in hushed corners of shacks, the enslaved spoke of the ferryman. Not aloud, not boldly, but in fragments. He rose for them by day, one said. But maybe at night. The thought hung in the air like smoke. David gave no answer. He returned to his ferry as though nothing had changed. Yet something had. For the first time, his silence was not just patience. It was protection. The river had shown him a truth. Accidents can be guided. Death can wear the mask of chance. And he alone held the oars. The drownings did not stop at one. Weeks later, another storm came. This time, 2 merchants crossing late, their cargo stacked heavy with ledgers and sealed casks. The water foamed, the wind howled. David rowed steady as ever, but when the boat tilted, he did not fight the current. The casks slid, the merchants scrambled, and the river opened its arms. Their cries were brief. Their bodies never returned. Again, accidents, they said. Again, storms to blame. Yet word spread. Something rode the ferries at night, something that chose its victims. The enslaved began to watch David with quiet reverence. Not openly, fear kept them cautious, but with a spark in their eyes, a flicker of hope where before there had only been resignation. The ferryman was no longer just a man. He was becoming something else, a shadow that rode both ways. By day he carried masters, overseers, and traders, as he always had. By night he dreamed of chains sinking into silence. The river's hunger was growing, and with each life it swallowed, David felt less fear, more purpose. He had thought the first drowning an accident, a gift of chance. But no, chance had nothing to do with it. The river wanted blood, and he could feed it. Hope spread quietly among the enslaved. They spoke of a ferryman who could carry not just cargo but souls to freedom. Some believed he had made a pact with the water, that the river itself rose at his command. Mothers hushed their children with stories of the oarsmen who rowed against death itself. The overseers heard fragments of these whispers and tightened their grip. More patrols walked the banks, lanterns flickering in the dark, but they could not patrol the river itself. It was too vast, too untamed. David began to test the waters. Not every crossing became a grave. Not every passenger was claimed. That would draw suspicion too soon. Instead, he chose carefully. The drunk, the cruel, the careless. Men whose absence could be blamed on their own vices. Each time he told himself it was the river's will. Each time, he felt the weight of silence grow heavier in him. But silence is not emptiness. It is waiting, and the enslaved waited too. When chains clinked in the dark, they no longer sounded like sorrow. They sounded like bells, faint but rising, announcing something yet to come. In the distance, the world was already shifting. The air in Carolina thickened with fear of revolt. Masters whispered of uprisings in other states, of fires in the night, of tools turned to weapons. Every rumor made overseers more brutal, their lashes sharper, their voices louder. Yet brutality could not silence the growing belief that something stirred beneath the surface of ordinary life. Each drowning fed that belief. Each rumor wrapped itself around David's name, though no one dared say it aloud. Some began to think of the river not as a barrier, but as a path. If the ferryman could take lives, could he not also carry freedom? David knew they were watching. He knew the weight of their hope pressed upon him like another set of chains. And still he rowed, day by day, night by night. Oars cutting water, silence filling the spaces between. The river was no longer just a passage. It was a weapon in David, its hand. The harbor was a mouth of teeth, its wharves crowded with ships that swallowed human lives and spat out profit. The air reeked of tar, salt, and sweat, thick with the cries of gulls and the groan of timber under weight too heavy to name. Ships waited like predators at anchor, their hulls dark, their decks slick with rain and blood alike. And on the shore, chained bodies stood in line, eyes lowered, as if staring too long at the horizon might brand them guilty. David had rowed upriver to Charleston before, carrying masters eager to sell rice and indigo. But this time was different. This time, his oars pulled him toward a vessel prepared for departure, its belly loaded not with cargo, but with flesh. Men and women pressed into its hold, shackled together, iron gnawing at bone. Children clung to their mothers in the dark. The overseers called it commerce. David called it damnation. The masters trusted him, as they always did. He was ordered to ferry goods, crates of salted pork, barrels of oil, sacks of rice, out to the ship. Alongside the cargo, he ferried men who carried whips, muskets, and ledgers. They laughed as they spoke of profits to come, of auctions waiting in Havana or New Orleans. They did not see the silence in David's eyes. They did not notice how long he stared at the barrels of oil, how his hands tightened on the oars when they spoke of selling children like cattle. By day, he rowed their cargo. By night, the river spoke. It was no longer a whisper, but a command. The water seemed restless, rising higher on the banks, lapping against hulls with a hunger that could not be ignored. David lay awake on the docks, staring at the lanterns that lit the slave ship's deck. Each flicker of flame seemed to call to him, to show him what the river demanded. Fire, it said. Fire in the belly of the beast. And so it began. That night, the harbor was thick with fog. Lanterns burned dim through the mist, turning the ships into looming shadows. David rowed silently, his oars sliding through black water without a sound. In the bottom of his boat lay what the masters themselves had given him, a spilled cask of oil, heavy with its stench, its lid cracked from rough handling. He carried it as though it were any other cargo. But the river knew. The river had been waiting. When he reached the ship, overseers barked orders from the deck, their voices sharp against the fog. They laughed at the ferryman's silence, mocking him as they hauled the barrels aboard. But David did not join in their laughter. He did not move quickly to leave, as he normally would. Instead, he lingered, watching. The lanterns glowed brighter as more cargo was raised, their light catching on chains that clinked from below deck. A sound rose with the chains. Low, broken moans, the voices of the damned. David's hand brushed against one of the lanterns at his feet. The flame licked at the glass, hungry, waiting. His heart thundered like the river in flood. A single act, and there would be no return. But there was no choice left. The drownings had been whispers. This would be a roar. He tipped the lantern. Oil spilled like blood across the deck. Flames caught quick, racing over wood slick with pitch. In seconds, the air was alive with fire. It spread to the sails, to the ropes, to the crates, stacked high. Overseers shouted, panic sharpening their voices. The ship groaned like a living thing as the blaze consumed it. Smoke coiled into the sky, thick and choking, carrying with it the screams of men who had thought themselves untouchable. Below deck, chaos erupted. Shackled souls pounded against the hold, their cries merging with the roar of fire. Some broke free in the confusion, rushing up into a deck already in flames. Others, unable to escape, threw themselves into the water, chains dragging them into the depths. The harbor became a graveyard, the river feasting on bodies both guilty and innocent. David rode back through the smoke, his face lit by the inferno behind him. The heat scorched his back, the screams followed him across the water. He did not look back. He did not need to. He could feel the ship's death in the pull of the river, in the way the current surged as if rejoicing. By dawn, the ship was ash. Its charred hull sank into the harbor, leaving only wreckage and the stench of burned flesh. Masters whispered of sabotage. Some said careless overseers had dropped a lantern. Others swore a storm of fire had risen from nowhere. None dared accuse the ferryman aloud, for he had been seen rowing as dutiful as ever. But suspicion lingered. And fear spread. Among the enslaved, the whispers grew louder, bolder. The ferryman had struck. The river had chosen its weapon. What had begun with drownings had become open fire, a message written in smoke above Charleston's waters. For every master who muttered of loss, a slave whispered of justice. For every overseer who cursed the accident, a mother told her child that the ferryman's oars could split not only water, but chains. David returned to the rivers as though nothing had changed. He rowed as he always had, silent, patient, obedient to their eyes. But inside, he knew there was no going back. He had given the river what it hungered for. He had shown the masters that their ships, their profits, their power could burn. The ferryman was no longer just a man. He was the river's hand, and the river was far from finished. The river does not forgive. It remembers, and so do the men who profit from its silence. After the burning of the ship in Charleston, fear spread through the low country like smoke through rafters. Masters whispered of sabotage, of curses, of unseen hands guiding fire and flood. Overseers, red-faced with anger, turned suspicion inward. They spoke David's name more often now, not aloud before the masters, but in mutters and clenched fists. Too many drownings, too many accidents, and now a ship gone to ash. Their ferryman's silence had grown heavy, dangerous. They watched him closely. Lanterns followed his every crossing. Guns appeared on the docks, their barrels glinting in sunlight. Men carried chains not only for slaves, but for him. Still, David rowed. Oars dipped, water split, silence held. Yet beneath his stillness, the river's hunger coiled tighter. Each watchful eye, each suspicion, only thickened the storm gathering in the water's heart. The overseers planned to strike, not in open daylight, but at night, when fear cloaked the river and men's imaginations sharpened its edges. They armed themselves with pistols, knives, muskets, and iron shackles. They told themselves they would bind him, drag him ashore, and hang him before the others as warning. They believed their weapons could tame him. They did not understand. Weapons mean nothing to the river. That night the tide rose high. The moon hid behind clouds, leaving the water black and unbroken. The swamp lay silent but for frogs croaking deep in the reeds. The air was thick with the smell of decay and salt. David stood at the dock, ordered once more to row his master's men across. The overseers climbed aboard, heavy with steel and suspicion. Their eyes gleamed, their hands clutched their muskets tight. They believed themselves hunters, but the river had already chosen them as prey. David pushed off, his oars biting into the water with steady strokes. The boat creaked under the weight of its cargo. Guns, chains, hatred. The men muttered among themselves, watching him, waiting for an excuse. They thought they had trapped the ferryman. They did not see the tide shift. They did not feel the current coil beneath them like a serpent. Halfway across, the air changed. The wind rose sharp, cutting through the swamp like a blade. The water swelled, not with storm, but with something deeper, something unnatural. David's arms did not falter, yet the boat rocked as if struck by unseen hands. The overseers cursed, clutching the sides, raising lanterns high. Flames flickered against water that rippled red, though no blood had yet spilled. Then came the sound, chains snapping, though no hands touched them. The iron at the overseers' belts, their shackles meant for others, quivered as if alive. One link cracked, then another, ringing like church bells across the swamp. Panic sharpened their voices. They aimed pistols at David, accusing, threatening. But before trigger could meet flint, the river surged. The boat lifted, tilted, and capsized. Water swallowed them whole. Oars splintered, lanterns hissed into blackness, and screams filled the night. Men clawed at each other, at the boat, at the air itself. Pistols fired uselessly into the dark, sparks snuffed by water before smoke could rise. Muskets sank like stones. Chains dragged heavy, pulling men down. Their shouts broke into gurgles, bubbles rising like prayers unanswered. David vanished in the chaos. Some swore they saw him slip into the depths, pulled under by the very current he once commanded. Others claimed they saw him standing, impossibly, atop the water as it swallowed his enemies, the ferryman's face lit by lightning that split the sky. Whether drowned or risen, none could say, but the river decided. And that night, it wanted blood. By dawn, the swamp was silent. Bits of wood floated on black water, the wreck of a ferry scattered like bones. No bodies returned to shore. The overseers had been erased, their voices gone, their weapons rusting at the river's bottom. Only the chains remained, washed against the reeds, broken, twisted, empty. The quarters buzzed with whispers. Word spread faster than the tide. The ferryman was gone, but not dead. Some said he had become one with the river, his oars eternal, guiding souls in secret. Others said he had rowed north beneath the cover of night, carrying fugitives to freedom. And some, trembling in fear and awe, believed he had become something else entirely. Not man, not spirit, but judgment itself, rowing forever between life and death. The masters said little. They avoided the water, crossing by land whenever possible, though the paths were longer, harsher. They forbade talk of the ferryman, but forbidding could not silence belief. Every drowned overseer, every capsized boat that followed, was laid at David's feet in memory. The river had become cursed in their eyes, sacred in others. What had begun as silence had ended in screams. And still, the river flowed on. Black, patient, unbroken. It kept its secrets well, but every ripple whispered of the ferryman. When the river finally stilled after that night of blood and broken oars, David was nowhere to be found. Some claimed he had been dragged beneath, his lungs filled with the same black water that had carried him all his life. Others whispered that the river had not killed him, but claimed him, making him part of itself. From that night onward, his absence became more powerful than his presence had ever been. In Charleston and Savannah, ferrymen began to vanish. Ships that set out with full crews returned empty, drifting like ghost vessels. Some carried no cargo, no men, only burn marks along their timbers, as if the river itself had licked them with fire. Overseers told each other it was bad luck, storms, or pirates, but their voices shook. They feared something far worse, something they could not name without trembling. Among the enslaved, David's name grew into legend. Mothers whispered it to their children when the lash cracked outside. Hush, the ferryman rose tonight. To some it was a warning, never cross dark waters at night, lest you be taken by his oars. To others it was a promise that if chains ever closed around your wrists, he would be waiting in the reeds, ready to row you away. His shadow became a dual truth, monster to the masters, deliverer to the chained. Stories spread faster than fire. In Georgia, they told of a patrol boat that overturned in calm waters, the men found days later with their throats full of river weeds. In the Carolinas, whispers claimed a ship carrying overseers never reached its port. When the wreck was found, The wood was clawed as if something had risen from below. In the low-country swamps, children swore they saw a man rowing silently in the mist, his eyes glowing like lanterns, his strokes leaving no sound. David was no longer just a man who once rowed ferries. He had become the river's shadow, the embodiment of resistance and revenge. To the oppressors, he was a haunting they could not whip away, a specter they could not hang or burn. To the enslaved, he was proof that even silence could rise up, that the waters themselves could thirst for justice. Years later, when war came and shackles began to break, the legend did not fade. Some soldiers reported phantom crossings at night, boats that rowed without oarsmen, guiding fugitives through enemy lines. Some swore they saw a dark figure watching from the reeds, his oars dripping red, as if reminding the living that freedom had been bought with blood. Was David savior or curse? No one could ever say. Perhaps he was both. Perhaps the river made him into what the world required, a ferryman for the lost and a hunter for the cruel. The low-country waters kept their secrets, but even now, when the tide rises and the wind carries a low moan across the reeds, the old ones still whisper, "The ferryman rose tonight," and the river remembers.